like someone wants to get funky.
Hey guys, welcome back to Rewind Reviews. Today we're going to be doing a spoiler talk for Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. So very quickly, if you're new here at all, what I do is, when it comes to the spoiler talk videos, I normally do like a separate review that focuses more on the actual movie itself, and then I do a review that talks more about the more in-depth things that I just want to talk about, but kind of would ruin things for people who haven't seen it. So this is your point to jump away. If you haven't seen the movie, then why are you here? But if you don't care, then stick around, because we're just going to go straight into it. I'm just going to talk not about absolutely everything that happens in the movie, but I'm going to be talking about specific things that I did want to address in my main review. I wasn't able to because I would have, spoiled it. So starting off, one of the biggest things that I did want to talk about in my spoiler-free review was the villain of this movie. If you've seen it, you're well aware, or if you've seen the trailers, you're kind of aware that the main villain throughout this movie is actually Wanda Maximoff, the Scarlet Witch. This has proven to be one of the more divisive elements of this movie, because I have been seeing people be quite against the idea of her becoming a villain, especially after everything that's been set up in WandaVision. I don't mind it. I've wanted to see her be like a proper villain for a really long time, so I was genuinely really happy that they did actually basically have the guts to actually go ahead with this and make her a full-on villain. Going all the way back to like Age of Ultron, they introduced her and her brother Quicksilver as potential antagonists alongside Ultron, but then over the course of the movie they start to learn Ultron is basically trying to wipe out everything on the planet, and they switch sides and join the Avengers. And basically everything that's been happening to Wanda over that time has been sort of slowly stripping away everything that she cares about, to the point where it genuinely does feel like the direction that they were always going to go towards, because I have always seen Scarlet Witch as somebody who can be really good but can also be one of the greatest threats that the Avengers have ever faced. So I'm genuinely happy that they really did absolutely go for it in this one, and I'm actually glad that they sort of took a bit more of a horror approach to her, because she is genuinely quite scary, and I think that her powers, what she's able to do, is genuinely quite chilling just how far she's able to go. I mentioned in my spoiler-free review that there's a lot of visual references and callbacks to other films, not necessarily in the MCU, and one of the ones that I forgot to mention was there's a little bit that I feel is quite close to It from 2017, where Pennywise is climbing out of a refrigerator and all his body's like twisting and all sorts. And there's a scene that's quite similar to that, where Wanda is trying to grab America Chavez, and she like appears in like this big gong, kind of hand comes out, and the next thing you know it's like all sort of twitching. She pulls herself out, and then all her body's like all falling back together. And it's a really great scene. I think that it really cements her as one of the scariest villains that they have had in the MCU. But having said that, and with all the build-up that we've had for Wanda over the years, I don't feel like the actual moment that she becomes a villain is really as thought out as I think it should have been. Basically why she becomes a villain in this is because everything that's happened in WandaVision involves her losing not only Vision but her kids. Her kids aren't real. She completely created them herself. They aren't real. So she goes on basically just a rampage to try and not only get her kids back, but she wants to actually go to another universe to do this. And America Chavez is the one who's able to travel the multiverse, of course. She is what Wanda wants. And in the post-credit scene that we had for WandaVision, it has Wanda actually learning about the Darkhold and reading it and studying how not only the Scarlet Witch works but her powers and the multiverse, and we even hear her kids screaming for help as well. It does set up that yes, she is going to be a bit more of a villainous role, but I think that the actual beat when she changes is just a bit too fast, because essentially what's happened is the Darkhold kind of corrupts whoever reads it, and because she's been reading it for however long's been between WandaVision and Doctor Strange, that it has taken a bit of a toll and it has really twisted her and warped her into somebody who will flat out murder people to get what she wants. And that's why I think that the costume's so different in this one as well, because it looks a little bit more charred and black, especially all around like the chest piece. I feel like that's kind of why it looks so different from what it did in WandaVision. So that's kind of why I didn't really want to mention why it looks different. So in that regard, I do think that there is enough time to have built up a lot of this motivation for the character. But I think that what I said in my spoiler-free review was I think that this movie could have had maybe like a secondary antagonist. I feel like having Wanda maybe have those moments of doubt that maybe she's not doing the right thing, and sort of having like maybe like the first half of the movie or so be sort of focused around this other antagonist, and as Wanda sees what it is that America is able to do, she starts kind of manipulating the situation a little bit more and starts kind of shifting everything towards her goals. So eventually when it gets to the second half of the movie, she will be the villain going forward, but she won't be anywhere near as violent as she was in this. Because back when Scott Derrickson, who was the original director for the first Doctor Strange movie, was working on this one, I believe what he wanted to do was introduce Nightmare, and for a long time I genuinely was convinced that Nightmare was going to be making an appearance in this movie. That big misty zombie Doctor Strange moment that they showed in the trailer with all the ghosts behind him, that was what I thought Nightmare was. I thought that's who that character was. And since the movie does sort of focus on the way that the multiverse is sort of represented, they actually mention at one point that whenever somebody dreams, basically what they are doing is seeing a multiversal version of themselves. Where you get Wong saying that, you know, he gets that dream where he's naked and he's getting chased by a clown. I'm kind of curious, but it is an interesting concept. You know, this does kind of change a lot of what we have seen within the MCU, because does that now mean that whenever somebody's had a dream within the MCU, was that another universe? In Infinity War we had Tony Stark mentioned that he had a dream that him and Pepper had a kid called Morgan. So was that always going to be the plan? It is an interesting concept that they do bring up, and I do think that if they are going to be doing stuff like that in the future, it is going to be interesting for them to follow through on. But yeah, having a secondary villain sort of manipulating things, yeah, maybe that might have been easier if Nightmare, for instance, was the one sort of manipulating things. Maybe if he was the one who was sort of like pushing Wanda to sort of help him, and he was like offering the opportunity to go and find her kids, I think that might have worked a little bit better, and I think that it would have sort of added a bit more to how quick her changes. It's very similar to Anakin Skywalker in Star Wars, because all like the build up towards the character becoming a villain is great. All the stuff when they are the villain is great. It's the change that doesn't work. It is very rushed, but the twist is actually quite good. I do think that the reveal is handled really well, but it is really fast and it does kind of come out of nowhere. Another thing I mentioned was that Sam Raimi likes to sprinkle in a few little things that he constantly does in all of his movies, and we do get a few of those returning back for this, because we have things like Bruce Campbell, who does make a little cameo appearance. Apparently he was actually meant to be a member of the Illuminati, and he was supposed to play as a Boulder, who's Thor's brother, which could have been quite an interesting thing for him to have done. I would have loved to have seen him as Mysterio, but it is a nice little appearance from him, and I do like his cameo, because it is funny and it is kind of in line with how he normally appears in a lot of these films. And I had heard rumours that apparently the second credit scene was going to be a comedy one. For some reason I was convinced that maybe it might be like Deadpool, like reading a comic or something and going, so that's how it ends. What we actually get is Bruce Campbell making another little appearance, and when his scene started playing, it immediately crossed my mind and I went, I think that that's going to be what happens at the end credits, and it was. So a nice little callback to him in as Ash in Evil Dead with his hands being possessed and it's just like slapping him, and the way they it's the first time that we've actually had anyone break the fourth wall in the MCU, so maybe that's setting up like Deadpool 3 when that happens, and maybe She-Hulk if they actually do go in the fourth wall direction, which I think could work. You know, like having like the courtroom scenes all be televised and like be first person shots when she's like addressing the court and then she sees the camera and then she's all addresses the camera, and I think that could work quite well. But for the time being, this is the only fourth wall break that we've properly had in the MCU. And we also get, once again, Sam Raimi's car makes a reappearance. I don't know why that's become a bit of a thing, but I do like that it has happened in pretty much every movie. The only one that I don't think it actually has is Oz, but might be wrong, but I didn't spot it. So it is kind of funny how that's kind of become like this running gag in a way, because like even the Spider-Man movies, all three of them, that car does make an appearance. In the Evil Dead movies, that's the car that Ash uses. In the TV series Ash vs Evil Dead, that's the one he uses. Just in case you didn't spot it, it's the scene where Strange and Christine are both trapped on the weird Stranger's world, the Sinister Strange, and they have like all those cars like floating past them, and like one of them is like a lingering shot of it going past, but that is when that car actually makes an appearance. And of course we've got to have the zombie sequences as well, and we have Strange early on in the movie actually has a dream that there's another version of Strange who's looking after America, and it turns out that is really happening. That version of Strange actually gets killed off. That becomes the zombie Strange that we kept seeing in the trailer. So what Strange is able to do is use something called a dream walking, where he's able to sort of travel along the multiverse, and he's able to basically possess people that are basically other versions of him from different worlds. What he's able to do is he brings this one back to life, and like some of the shots are directly out of the Evil Dead. There's even a sequence where like it sort of references the poster as well of like the somebody getting dragged down into the dirt. So it was quite a nice little callback, because even fans made a poster of it a while ago. I think Cumberbatch was having an absolute blast doing that. This is basically like the fourth role that he has to play, because technically it's three, but it's really four, because like, just the way that he's acting and everything. It is a really great way that they have handled it. I love the makeup. It does look really good, and I think that the way that they've sort of enhanced it a little bit with a few effects here and there, it does look genuinely great. And the Evil Dead references don't really stop there, because there's these wraith things that are basically like trying to stop him from travelling the multiverse. They basically are like the Evil Dead creatures in a way, with the way that but I love how he's able to control them, and the way that he ends up basically like bring them to himself, and he like creates like his cape. It looks amazing. You know, nice Strange has the cloak of levitation, zombie Strange has the cloak of death. There's another scene that I did mention in my spoiler-free review that I do want to actually talk about. It's a scene where it basically kind of focuses on the music of the movie, because we have Doctor Strange going up against the Sinister Strange, and what they end up doing is they kind of get into a weird sort of music battle where they're like using musical chords and like using them as weapons, like throw at each other. It's really visually great. I think that Danny Elfman's music really does enhance that sequence a lot. And as I said, there's a lot of callbacks to other movies, and I feel like this one is very much directly out of Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, which coincidentally also stars Captain Marvel and Captain America. But that scene is genuinely really good, because like it's such a visually interesting action sequences. It's nothing like we've seen before. The music is genuinely great, with the way that it's got quite heroic and then evil and then bouncing all up between them. But it is very similar to that Scott Pilgrim sequence, which I don't mind. I think that it is a nice little callback, and I do think that especially people within like the comic book community, that is quite a highly regarded movie, especially among like filmmakers who are within those kind of films. So it does make sense that they would sort of reference it in some way, whether it was intentional or not. And really quickly, I'm actually quite surprised that they have officially confirmed that yes, Strange actually did have a sister, and they do sort of talk a bit about that story. And it is odd why they never actually addressed it in the first movie, because if you've seen the animated film, you're sort of aware that that's kind of why he sort of becomes a doctor in a way, but they've changed it quite a bit for this one so that it's not too pivotal to him becoming a doctor. It does have a lasting impact on him, and I am genuinely glad that they have addressed it finally. And there was one big part of the movie that I didn't want to talk about, just in case I'd say something that people weren't aware of. I mean, I'm aware that I did put a little clip in the review. It's out in public. I'm not really spoiling anything, so I thought I'd actually save the actual talk for this. So there was a lot of fan speculation and anticipation around this movie, because there was a lot of characters that people were expecting to make appearances in this. People like Deadpool, there was Wolverine, there was Blade, there's Ghost Rider. We even had Tom Cruise as Iron Man at one point, which I'm actually on board with, and I'm a little disappointed that never happened, because like, for anyone who isn't aware, he is actually the original choice for Iron Man. He was what they were originally going to be getting for the first Iron Man movie, until they went for Robert Downey Jr. It all worked out well in the end, but I am curious to see what he would have done with the role, so I'm kind of disappointed that we never really got to see that, so maybe in the future. And of course, there's also one other character who was heavily rumoured to be in this movie. Well, why do you think I'm wearing this shirt? Because I really like this shirt. There's no Tobey Maguire in this movie, and I don't understand why it was people were convinced that he was going to make an appearance in this. Sony owns Spider-Man. Why are people not aware of this? It would have been really cool to have had either Toby or Andrew make a reappearance in this movie, but it just doesn't really make sense within context of where this movie is, and because of the rights issues there's no way that it would have happened. I'm more just surprised that so many people were convinced that it was going to be happening. But there are a lot of cameos, there are a lot of surprises and Easter eggs throughout this movie. It hasn't helped that there was a lot of leaks when they were developing this movie. There was concept art of certain characters and certain scenes that are in the film. We weren't too surprised by certain people making an appearance, but it was a good surprise, and it is really well executed. So the big surprise in this movie, the big cameo sequence that we actually have in this movie, was sort of shown in the trailers, and it involves the Illuminati. Now, it's not the version that people are more familiar with from the comics. It is more an MCU oriented Illuminati. So the characters that do make an appearance in this include Maria Rambeau as Captain Marvel. We get the live action debut of Captain Carter, played by Hayley Atwell, who was in What If, the animated series. We also have Mordo, played by Chiwetel Ejiofor. For some reason I was really surprised that he was actually part of the Illuminati, because there's always supposed to be 6 members, and for some reason it just didn't cross my mind that yeah, he actually was the 6th member, which does make sense because they do address that there actually was a Doctor Strange that was part of the Illuminati in that universe, and unfortunately because he was corrupted by the Darkholds, he was basically executed. You might think that's a little bit too far, but let's not forget the Illuminati are the same people that decided that the Hulk was too dangerous and decided to send him off to Sakaar. But yes, we also do get Professor Charles Xavier, played by Patrick Stewart, in his yellow hover chair, and honestly it's such a great appearance when he does actually show up, because like even though we knew he was going to be in the movie, there was one thing that I was thinking, are they actually going to do this or not? And then as soon as he shows up, the 90s X-Men theme starts playing. The 90s era of Marvel Comics animated shows, I did grow up with things like X-Men and Spider-Man and the Hulk. The X-Men theme is basically like Marvel's national anthem. It is so iconic. It is absolutely brilliant that they actually decided to actually use that for this movie, and I do hope that when the X-Men do get officially introduced into the MCU, like the proper mainline MCU, that we do get that theme in some way. You know, we got a pretty awesome rendition of the 60s Spider-Man theme for the opening title of Homecoming, so why not do it for X-Men? It is really nice seeing Patrick Stewart as Professor X again, and it's kind of nice that this is a bit more of a hopeful version of him compared to when we last saw him in Logan, but it is really a nice way that they have introduced him into this movie, and I think that the way that they've dealt with his comic book powers as well, I think it is a lot more comic book accurate, because the way that he does like hold his head, and you've got like the pulse whenever he's using his powers, so I think visually it is more reminiscent of what the comics are. I've got to be honest, I think the costumes that they have actually used for these characters, they are genuinely really good. I do like this sort of slightly altered version that they've used for the Captain Marvel suit with Lashana Lynch. I think that it looks pretty cool. I think the way that they've realised the Captain Carter suit is pretty cool. But then we also get 2 other big characters that are introduced into this movie. First one, Anson Mount actually manages to make his MCU debut all the way from the TV series as Black Bolt. He actually manages to return for this. It is genuinely great to get to see him actually kind of redeem himself for this role, because he was one of the best aspects of the Inhumans TV show, and I do really like his casting, so it is great that they did bring him back for this, and I really like that they've sort of upgraded not only his look, the costume looks incredible. I hope we see it again someday, and I really love how they've handled his powers as well, because I didn't think that his powers were really sort of realised too well in the TV series, because it's just sort of him shouting and then just a big and it just doesn't look really good. So I really like how it's like whenever he's talking, like the pitchfork on his head sort of lights up, and then the sound sort of builds and builds and builds and builds and builds, and like this gigantic sonic wave, and it genuinely looks great. And he flies as well. But the biggest surprise, honestly, is John Krasinski as Mr. Fantastic. He's been a fan cast for this role for a very long time, because I think a lot of people really want to see him as Reed and they want to see Emily Blunt as the Invisible Woman. I'm on board with, and I do think that having John Krasinski get to play this role is genuinely a brilliant move. He is a really good choice for this role. I love the direction that he does sort of take with this character. I like the little TVA reference that might be foreshadowing that they might have Kang actually be his descendant. Costume is absolutely fantastic. It really looks great, and I really hope that that is what they kind of use in the future for the Fantastic Four movie. But the only downside is we don't really get to see him use his powers too much. You sort of get a little glimpse of him stretching here and there, but you don't really get to see him like properly doing anything because they all die. Now, I said in a spoiler-free review that this movie is quite graphic and violent, and this is by far the worst scene in the movie for that, because Wanda basically dreamwalks into her other universe self, and she decides to invade the Illuminati holding cell that I don't really know what it's actually called. She basically comes bursting in, and all the Ultron bots all go after her. So maybe Tom Cruise, Iron Man, was part of this, we don't know. And she comes in, she takes them all out, and then the Illuminati take their stand, and the way that she takes out Black Bolt is genuinely quite clever, and it is very disturbing for a 12A movie, with the way that, like I say, he can take you out with just a whisper from his mouth. What mouth? And then it just sort of pans away from him, and then his mouth has just turned into like Neo from the Matrix, and then next thing you know. But it does kind of make me question just how smart is Reed Richards, because why would you tell the person who's going to kill you that that's what he can do? So it is kind of divisive why it is that the entire Illuminati does get killed off in this movie. It is very extreme for this kind of movie. Maybe it's a bit too far for Wanda's character. I sort of felt like maybe it should have been like an accident or something. This is where I'm saying like an external villain might have helped. Like maybe he's sort of pressuring her into getting America Chavez, and she's getting more and more desperate, and it's just like this big overload, and then eventually she just snaps, and then and that's what kills them. I think it is a good sequence. I do think that the action is really good, but I'm disappointed how quick Mr. Fantastic's taken out, because again, smartest man on the planet, and what is he going to do, just like grab her or something? It's not a great idea for them to do, and I felt like having pasta after I watched the movie. But then we kind of get a bit more of an extended action sequence where Wanda fights off Captain Carter and Captain Marvel, and I think it is kind of odd how Captain Carter is kind of able to hold her own a lot longer against like the guy who can reduce mountains. But it is a good action sequence. I do think the way that it does end, it is really graphic, but it is really well done. I know some people are going to be quite disappointed with it, and I can understand that, and part of me does feel that way, but at the same time, this isn't the main MCU. This is just an alternate universe version of them, and if they ever actually addressed that another universe Wanda came in to kill them all, then maybe it might be setting up Secret Wars. But there was one sequence that I was quite disappointed with when it came to the Illuminati characters, because I feel like what they did with Charles Xavier is a little bit far. What they do with him is he gets into a bit of a mind battle with Wanda. Visually it looks amazing, and I think that the way that it plays out, it is genuinely shocking, and it's one of the moments that the kids behind me were gasping, because it is quite terrifying having her jumping out of the red fog with like that sort of horrible demon face. And I'll also admit, I said there was a few nasty jump scares in this movie that didn't really bother me. There was only one that did get me, and it's the scene where Charles goes over to the rubble. I thought he was going to be climbing in and he was going to end up in like Agatha's vaults, and you see all like the different doorways like leading off to different memories for Wanda. So it's a bit of a nostalgia trip for anyone who's like been up to date with everything in the MCU. So I wasn't really expecting Wanda to just burst out of the rubble, so that's the only bit that actually got me. But what I was expecting in that sequence was, I was kind of hoping that maybe Charles actually sort of brings out Wanda again, like the good version of Wanda, and he sort of forces the good version of Wanda to basically confront the evil Scarlet Witch, and the two of them have a bit of a clash within her mind, and of course the evil one wins, and that's where the story continues going forward, and that's how Charles ends up dying, which I do think would be a bit more dramatically better, and it would sort of show the conflict of Wanda, and I think that would make her a bit more sympathetic. Not that she isn't already, but I do think that when it comes to this movie, because her turn's so fast, I think that having her darker self have some sort of conflict with a good self, and having that be visually represented in the astral plane, it would have made it a bit more interesting. I think that you would have felt for it a lot more. And since I mentioned the Darkhold, one of the things that I've seen many fans be absolutely convinced by is that they think that Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Inhumans, all the Netflix shows, as well as things like Cloak and Dagger and I think Runaways as well, are all connected to the MCU. I don't think they are, and I've never said that they are. I think that this movie kind of proves once and for all that they aren't canon, because I've always seen them as more of an offshoot. I think that if they can exist within the MCU, it would more than likely be like a branch timeline where they existed and the Avengers were off doing their own thing, because yes, they do mention the Avengers, they do kind of reference things that happened in the movies, but the movies never referenced them, and the inclusion of the Darkhold is kind of the clue that maybe they're not canon, because the Scarlet Witch even destroys it at one point. Why would it exist in all the other ones? Because it means that the Darkhold doesn't exist anymore. So I don't think that Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and things like that are canon, but it'd be nice to have those characters make appearances again. It is great seeing like Charlie Cox and Vincent D'Onofrio making a reappearance as Daredevil and Kingpin, but they aren't the same ones from the Netflix show, because there are things that do separate them from those shows. Can't really prove it when it comes to Matt Murdock, because he doesn't really seem too different, but when it comes to the Kingpin, yes, he is very different to how he is in the TV series. Not personality or anything, because Vincent D'Onofrio does actually play the character very similarly to how he was in Daredevil. It's the fact that he's now able to be shot by arrows, he's run over by a car, he's ripping doors off, he's wearing more extravagant clothing, he's a bit more out in the open. This is not the same version of Kingpin that was in Daredevil. I don't think that those shows are canon to the MCU, and you know, I understand that people are disappointed if that genuinely is the case. It is a bit of a tricky situation to really sort of understand, especially with everything that's going on. I've always seen it as, if it's Marvel Entertainment, it's not canon to the MCU. If it's Marvel Studios, it is. So anything that's on Disney Plus, all the Marvel Studios produced TV shows, WandaVision, Loki, What If, The Falcon and Winter Soldier, Hawkeye, Moon Knight, they are all MCU canon. Everything that was just under ABC, Marvel Entertainment, they aren't canon. I've had people try to start arguments with me over that before. There was some guy on Facebook a few years ago who sort of saying all about like Luke Cage and all sorts, and I basically went, no, you are aware that they're not going to be canon to the MCU, and he was like, no, lol, what do you mean by that, lol? I just didn't really get into that. I basically just like found a link to a website that basically said that they weren't canon, and then just sent it and then just dropped it. So it is a bit of a touchy subject, and I would like Marvel to kind of come out and actually officially say it, but I think they're going to sort of leave it lingering enough that you could sort of say that maybe they are canon, because they won't address any of those events, but for all intents and purposes they will basically be rebooted versions of these characters. I hope we do get a reboot of Inhumans, because I think that they were planning on doing an Inhumans movie back in like 2019, and unfortunately that didn't happen because of the Fox merger, so they don't really need the Inhumans now, they've got the X-Men, which sort of led them to now change Miss Marvel's powers because she is no longer an Inhuman. But there is a lot of potential for those characters, and I do genuinely like what the Inhumans do bring to the Marvel universe, so I would be curious to see what direction they go with them, because I feel like there is a lot of potential for them, and I do think they are separate enough from the X-Men that they could exist at the same time. There's also a few little Easter eggs here and there for other things that might sort of set up things in the future. I think that Living Tribunal makes his appearance. There's one thing that they kind of set up within this movie, and that's the Book of Vishanti, which I've heard of. It's referenced in the Lego games as well. That's how kind of well known it is. So it is really weird why they decided to sort of big this thing up and then just destroy it. It just felt so pointless that they were kind of doing that, because it just felt like, why were they heading towards this? Because it it goes nowhere. And that kind of brings me on to the multiversal side of things. We were kind of expecting it to really dive into different universes. We wanted Doctor Strange to journey to other universes and other versions of Earth and meet all these different characters, and they only really do like 3 different worlds. There is a really good sequence where Strange and America get sort of caught in like this slipstream where they're like going from universe to universe, and I swear you see things like the Noir world and 2099 and I think the Savage Lands as well. It is a genuinely great sequence, and I wish we had got a lot more of it, but maybe it was the wisest decision to have it be more focused on Strange protecting America, because that just feels like a much more personal story. They do put the characters front and centre in the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies, and it does make more sense, because if it was just cameo after cameo after cameo, it wouldn't quite have the emotional resonance that this movie has. But I think a lot of people, myself included, were sort of expecting this movie to really set up everything that's going to come, because we sort of thought that the X-Men were going to get dragged into things. That didn't happen. Maybe the Fantastic Four get dragged into things. That doesn't happen. There is a mid-credit scene where Clea, played by Charlize Theron, shows up. I'm not too familiar with the character. As big a Strange fan as I am, that's not really a character that I've come across too much. I'm aware the character exists. I've seen pictures. I'm aware that she's his girlfriend and the niece of Dormammu, or the daughter of Dormammu, connected to Dormammu in some way. They do sort of reference that by showing the Dark Dimension in this post-credit scene, but I don't really know the character too well. So when she showed up, I was kind of like, who's this? But there were a few little gasps. I think I was more surprised at who it was that was playing this role. So it is great seeing Charlize actually get to make her appearance in the MCU, and I really hope they do more with her in the future. But one thing I was kind of surprised by is I believe Elizabeth Olsen has already signed on for like another 7 years or 7 movies or project. I don't know the specifics of this new deal, but it is really strange why it appears as though her character is killed off in this film. And I feel like it is kind of where her character's building to at this point, because I feel like that's the only place that she can really sort of go now they've gone down the evil angle. There are ways that they could bring her back into this, and I think that especially like the White Vision is still out there, who doesn't make an appearance in this movie. They could still have that integrate in some way, and I do think that there is more that they can do with Wanda, so I hope this isn't the end of it. I do really love Elizabeth Olsen in these movies. I think that she is one of the best performers in the MCU, and I feel like it'd be a really just big disservice to not only the franchise but for her, because she is brilliant, and what they can do with her in the future is genuinely really interesting. There's so many possibilities and directions that they could go in at this point. It does seem like maybe they are setting up a Secret Wars project, but we don't know, because officially there's no new Avengers movies in development. So if we do get one, it could be absolutely amazing. It could be messy, we don't know, because Phase 4's been a little bit all over the place and a bit chaotic at times, because this is kind of back in like Phase 1 territory where it might be building up something, but we don't really know. Honestly, whatever direction it is going in, I really hope that it's as satisfying as the Infinity Saga, and each of the individual movies are just as good as the past phase. That's all I've got to say for today's spoiler talk, so thank you so much for watching. Please like, please subscribe, hit the notification button to keep up to date on everything that's going on this channel. If you have any suggestions for anything you want me to take a look at and do a rewind review for, let me know down in the comments. Also be sure to let me know what you thought of the movie. Was there anything you were surprised by? Was there anything that you weren't surprised by? Was there any sort of theories or anything that you had for this movie? Where do you think that the franchise is going from here? Always love to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for watching the spoiler free review as well. I had a bit of fun making the short at the beginning of that. You know, some people have been in touch and they've said that they've really liked it. So I don't do them too often because I don't have a lot of time to really do things like that, but I had some spare time to do that, and I just had this really fun idea, so I just wanted to do that. So I will be doing them again one day in the future, but it probably won't be for a little while. But thank you so much for watching, and there's nothing else to say except it's over.